Hey Internet, it's your old friend Dominic here with the All-American Casino Guide, a channel dedicated to providing you with all those tips, tricks, tutorials, and trivia that you possibly need to know about casinos and casino games. So today we're going to be covering the topic of reading poker players, specifically how to get into their heads and try to understand the strength of their hands and even possibly their intentions and how we can look out for possible bluffs. On top of the mathematical approach to poker, which is very understandable and time-honored and tested, there is this social aspect, which is the body language, the table chatter, and it's through this analysis of this social aspect, the social science of the game, players have a better chance of winning overall. Intrinsically, every player has their own playing style. And essentially through our understanding of these behaviors and patterns, we can learn how to defeat them. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started and talk about body language. So the poker analysts online, they focus heavily on the maths. And one of the things that gets overlooked is this social science aspect of the game of poker. And one of the things that I think is fundamental is our understanding of body language during live play. It's pretty much one of the most important things to learn outside of mathematical theory. So we've already made an in-depth video about that online, providing you with all the particular details about what you should be on the lookout when it comes to body language. So check out that video if you haven't already. It provides some really great, well-rounded understandings of the subject. But essentially, there are some unconscious, subtle physical behaviors that you should be on the lookout for in your opponents. So whenever we're at the poker table, one of the things we need to be on the lookout for is tells. What are tells exactly? Well, they're a subtle way that players give away that they might have a good or a bad hand. Generally, they are nervous tics, fidgeting, checking your cards constantly, profuse sweating, long eye contact or lack of eye contact. They could be lighting a cigarette or taking sips of their drink. It's really impossible to list every single tic that I've personally observed, at least in one video. Most of these tells are just ingrained in our human behavior. You don't necessarily need to be a poker player to know what a tell could mean, though. So, for example, sweating is a natural human behavior. We do it when we're nervous. So it would likely mean that a player isn't too confident about their decisions if they happen to be sweating a lot. And they might be scared someone will beat their hand with a better one. The main thing to look out for, though, overall when it comes to these tells is really a change in behavior. If a player is fidgeting all the time and then all of a sudden happens to go really rigid and focused in a hand, that could be an indication that that player has a big important hand and now all their mental focus is not on the fidgeting but that hand. And be observant to kind of think after that hand was over, did they go back to fidgeting? Just watch out for a consistency. Find a baseline behavior pattern in every single player and then be on the lookout for when that behavior changes, okay? However, consistency and change in behavior can only be observed and studied after playing against a person for a certain amount of time. I won't be specific about how long that is, but essentially don't expect to be able to sit down at a table and immediately start beating everyone just by looking at them for a couple of minutes. Play a few hands, test the waters, and just gradually attempt to identify each player's unique behaviors. So an experienced player obviously understands what tells are and knows what to look out for. But they also have the ability to use fake tells to disguise their hands. So essentially tells, as I said, are very difficult to hide, and the most experienced players know this, and they themselves will sometimes let something loose. Sometimes by accident, sometimes on purpose, in order to give off some information to their opponents. The trick is to learn how to replicate this tell in order to misguide your opponents. So for example, if I was a player who every once in a while I touch my nose whenever I happen to have a bad hand, and everyone that I play with happens to know, hey, Dom's got this stupid tell where he touches his hand or touches his nose every time he has a bad hand. So if he touches his nose, you know he's bluffing. Well, then inadvertently I have given this information off, and so to use a fake tell, I could then, when I have a really good hand, decide to touch my nose in order to make everyone at the table think I have a bad hand, and then either call my big bet or even go in big themselves, and then here I am holding the nuts at the showdown. It's very important to look out for people who could be faking these tells, and at the same time differentiate them from legitimate players with legitimate tells. It's really what makes reading people very difficult, and where the mastery of the particular social aspect of the game comes into play. As with all things, it takes time, effort, and a lot of patience to master reading people properly. So a lot of the televised poker out there shows these giants of the poker world sitting very stoically behind their stacks of chips, and they hardly communicate at all. They just communicate through chip movements and flipping over cards at showdowns. But I think it's the characters at the World Series of Poker that are real talkers. I won't name any names, you know who they are. But specifically, these guys are the most interesting case when it comes to the game of poker, and at least its mastery, and that's the social aspect. Now, if you don't know this, you can actually talk as much as you want at the poker table. You can say whatever you want, whenever you want, but I really don't recommend doing this, as verbal diarrhea is going to essentially rub a lot of people the wrong way, and you might even get certain players on tilt. Now, that might be what you were looking for in the first place, but look out for somebody who is always yapping at the table, because then a common tell that these guys have is that all of a sudden they stop talking, and then you know that they're really focused on their hands, okay? So just like physical tells, there are auditory tells, all right? You can listen to the sound of someone's voice, if it's going high or low, if they're getting angry in the reflection of what they're saying if the topic has changed. If you can't get anyone to really give away any information at the table, one thing I recommend is just try to talk with the table and make small chat and see if anybody wants to take your bait, essentially, and talk to you. It gives them information about who they are, and maybe you can see how they play their hands while talking. Do they play strong hands, straight hands, all right? As with any physical tells, these speech tells can fit into a behavioral pattern, and you can analyze their behavioral pattern and how it reflects to their play pattern, and you can learn to read them more accurately over time. Soon enough, you'll be able to understand who at the table is the one bluffing their faces off, and who is the one who happens to be just a pompous who just happens to also be holding bullets. You're going to come across essentially all kinds of players at live play events, okay? The dead silent ones, or the ones like myself who just can't shut up. So be on the lookout for certain patterns of these particular players. So another important aspect to take a look at is individual play styles. Now, we have a number of videos up on the channel when it comes to play styles. We recently uploaded one that talks specifically about how to play against aggressive players. So if you haven't seen that video yet, I recommend you go and check out that video whenever you can. Essentially, every single player will have a specific style of play. This goes from passive to aggressive. And every player has a tendency of betting heavy or betting light, but of course there's this wild area in between. Now, some players will only bet big when they have a strong hand, and they have this more mathematical approach to the game rather than an attempt to trick you or use the social sciences. Others tend to lie their face off all the time and are constantly trying to play the social game because they just can't quite seem to be making it playing the math game. It's important for you to keep track of the players at the table and figure out what each of their strategies happens to be, so you can predict their moves and potentially counter them. Be on the lookout though, because while you're trying to analyze them, they're most likely trying to analyze you. So online poker is really growing in popularity, and actually it's become quite a thing these days. If you're watching this video, you might be someone who often or even exclusively plays online. So many of the techniques we've talked about in this video might not really apply to you, as in online you can't really see your opponents in the flesh. However, everything else still applies. So for example, you can still be studying the playing styles of your particular opponents. An important thing to be on the lookout for is how long a player might take in the pauses they take in between actions. These can tell you a lot about the confidence a player might have. You might be able to notice certain behaviors in their certain behavior patterns when it comes to the time it takes for a player to perform an action during any particular online poker game. Normally, longer pauses indicate less confidence, more thinking. Possibly this could indicate that the player is second-guessing their decision to call the hand, or even second-guessing that raise. And they even could be trying to pull off a bluff. So it all depends. A longer pause is not a good thing. It might be something that you should be aware of. Shorter pauses normally indicate the opposite, meaning confidence in their decisions. A player that folds very often at the start of every game is possibly someone who only goes in for those stronger hands. They play a very tight game of poker. While a player who plays many hands is most likely bluffing a lot, unless they just happen to be really lucky and or they're the kind of person who just plays hands so they can see the flop. I don't know, it's getting so wild in the online community nowadays. Another helpful tip is when you're at home or in a cafe, when you have your phone or your laptop, you can take notes without anyone really knowing. Take advantage of this because this is something you normally are able to use while sitting with your friends, or especially not in a casino. You don't have to, where you would have to rely on your memory. Jot down everything that's worth noting about the behavior and the betting patterns of the other players. You could make shorthand notes to write down the hand history of each player to understand the choices of hands that they potentially play, how loose or tight their particular play style is when it comes to hole cards. Many online games even include chat or a series of pre-written replies that you can choose from. So treat these as you would treat talking at a real-life poker table and give them a try. Most of what we said earlier will be applicable. So a little trick here is you can pull off to instigate a conversation with people is go ahead and just start talking. All right, just drop out some random message and see if you can get some banter going. This banter might give something away that you can use later in the game. So I really hope you enjoyed this brief overview on how to read people in poker. As I said earlier, we have a number of videos on the channel that talk about different play styles that you need to be on the lookout and advice on how to deal with them in turn. So make sure to check those out whenever you get a chance. So make sure to clickety-clack that like button, leave a comment down below if you can, tell us about anything we might have missed, slam that subscribe button, ring-a-ding-ding that notification bell, because that's the only way that you're going to be guaranteed to be told when we upload those videos. And as always, make sweet, sweet love to that share button. My name's Dominic. This has been the All-American Casino Guide reminding you, play responsibly.